time is 3 o'clock South African time. That's 1500 GMT plus 2 on Wednesday, the 21st of April, 2021. This is the Situation Room with me, Gavin, Enslin, and today we're going to be looking at concern over what experts are talking about as being a double mutation in India and South Africa. While the COVID numbers remain low, there's been an excess death spike. We'll be looking at that. And then Chauvin, the police officer accused of murdering George Floyd, was found guilty by a jury in the United States last night, South African time. So we'll be looking at that. Anyway, please pray with me. Please get out a notebook and take notes, because we're going to be sharing the word. Looking at all of this news that is going on, we're going to be sharing the word. And I believe God's got a powerful word for us in terms of the world, in terms of how we as Christians reach the world. You know, if you don't believe in Jesus, then just watch this, because you're going to get some of the insights, you know, that the Bible has in terms of people that haven't accepted Jesus as the Lord and Savior. You might well find them interesting. Anyway, moving on to the stats. There are now 144.227 million infections with 3.068 million deaths, 122.762 million recoveries, 18,396,000 active confirmed cases. And I have to admit, this is confusing me. The number of active cases has dropped dramatically, you know, from about 26,000 last week to 18,000. But the new infections is actually skyrocketing, and also the critical, you know, those that are critical is 109,000. So I'm not 100% sure how that works, but anyway, we'll look into that over time. Looking at the United States, 32.45 million infections, 581,000 dead, so they're still going up there. But India just absolutely exploding. They had over 300,000 new infections yesterday, sitting at 15.321 million infections, 180,000 dead. Brazil, 13.977 million infections, 375,000 dead. France, 5.296 million infections, 101,000 dead. And Russia, 4.7 million infections, 105,000 dead. The UK's infection and death toll still remaining low. Now in South Africa, 1,568,366 infections, 53,887 deaths, 19,849 active cases, which has dropped, and 1,494,630 recoveries. Yesterday, 853 new infections, but 130 new deaths. So still, the death toll is still pretty high. And again, a thing that we're seeing is that the deaths are not dropping as low as what the infections seem to be dropping. The hospitalization slightly up, 3,670, and the 7-day moving average is 1,201 per day. So that's one up on the day before. So if you look at the moving average graph, it is going slightly upwards. Now looking at the test positivity rate, we see that one spike there where it's jumped, you know, to nearly 10%. That was over the weekend, but that's sitting at 3.57%. So looking at that, the last average was 4.2%. That's still very, very low. However, when looking at the report on weekly deaths, if you look at the orange line there, that orange line is the forecast based on, you know, past years, the forecast of the number of deaths. And you see there that obviously it spiked massively over December, January in South Africa at its second wave. That correlates pretty well with the second wave here in South Africa. And then you see it dropped, but it didn't drop back to normal levels. You know, since May last year, it hasn't really been at normal levels of death for a sustained period of time. So we've been sitting at hovering around the 10,000 per week mark dying in South Africa. The deaths from natural causes, now that is within the range. So the deaths from natural causes is within the range, although there has been the last week or two, there has been a spike in excess deaths. You know, for the week of the 21st of March and the 4th of April. That's the last 2 weeks for which we have data. So that is a question mark. You know, first of all, if you look at total deaths, what's causing that excess death number? And then you're looking at the natural causes, and that's for those 1 to 59 years of age. That's within the range, but also seeming to spike. So, you know, we'll see if we can find out what's going on there. Now, looking at India, there you can see their graph. So yesterday, touching on almost 300,000 new infections, as we said earlier, And the daily deaths there, I've just put that in below the graph, 2020. And what they're talking about in India is this double variant. And they're sitting now with over 2 million active cases in India alone. And so yesterday, apparently, also there was a record worldwide for a number of new infections. But I mean, if COVID-19 is exploding through India, which is the second most populous nation in the world, then obviously that's going to affect the average. I mean, 1/7 of the world's population lives in India, and so if cases are exploding there, then that's going to have an impact, on the overall statistics. And so we're just waiting to see, when this thing's going to, hit a peak. But India's experiencing an explosion there like never before. And the death toll also is at the highest that it's been. Now, moving on to news, and we see even in South African news, ex-policeman Derek Chauvin found guilty of George Floyd's murder. So he was found guilty, and in the next 8 weeks or so, he's going to be sentenced. We'll look a little bit at that from America. And then also somber mood as grieving Queen Elizabeth II turns 95. So she's 95. And then the article on EWN, that's Eyewitness News in South Africa, Vladimir Putin is bringing power back to Russia at all costs. So Putin's still the bad man of the world. The Super League, I don't know if you heard about the Super League, but 12 clubs in Europe wanted to do a breakaway Super League, and that thing fell apart last night. Liverpool, Manchester United, Arsenal, Manchester City, were amongst the clubs that were in Chelsea, I think. They were amongst the clubs that were involved from the Premier League. They've now all pulled out, and that's caused a huge storm, in terms of what these owners have done. Many of them not even from the UK. Then moving on to CNN, Chauvin guilty. In the streets of Minneapolis, the verdicts led to cries of joy and sighs of relief among those watching Derek Chauvin's trial. It's almost like it was Christmas. And then also they have an article, these blood clot experts explain why they want you to get a COVID-19 vaccine. And obviously this is something we've spoken about before, is that one of the problems with COVID-19 is that it can cause blood clots, which causes people to die of strokes and heart attacks. And in June, July last year, here in Johannesburg, South Africa, there was, if you go and speak to most pastors, there was a spate of heart attacks and strokes and people just dying suddenly, like you couldn't believe. And many of them were not rated as COVID-19. But many of us believe there's no other explanation why so many people's only got heart attacks. There's a certain amount of heart attacks you're expecting, and when all the pastors are saying, gee, people are just dying all around us, we're doing funerals, heart attacks, people like myself, we really believe many of those were caused by this blood clotting thing. However, what I do also want to caution is that the vaccine is not the only solution, because if the person gets treatment early, then the blood clotting in that can be mitigated. There's a regimen of medicines, obviously Ivermectin being one of the very effective ones, but normally the doctors that know what they're doing, that don't lose patients, prescribe somewhere between 6 to maybe 8 to 9 different medications, and they're very successful. In some instances, almost 100% successful in avoiding their patients dying, and even in avoiding them going to hospital. So you do need to treat it though. I just want to warn you of that. The people that are saying it's not bad, that's not my experience. But anyway, looking at Chauvin, so obviously CNN very happy that he's been found guilty. If you look at National File, they're not so happy, and you see their article says it worked. BLM activists claim Chauvin only convicted because of the riots and the protests. And the thing I'd like to say there is, just because protesters believe that someone's guilty, that would not necessarily mean they're guilty. And if you're going to start going into this kind of justice, where does that end up? Just go and have a look at what happened with the French Revolution. And then Bill O'Reilly, who's a very famous telecaster, political commentator, used to be on Fox News, he said, I understand that some people feel that this country does not treat them fairly, but to celebrate the destruction of another human being is wrong. The social implications of this trial on the country will be long-lasting. And as I look at the comments, coming from different sources, there are those that are extremely happy at what has happened, and those that aren't. And one of the things I've been saying, America is on a pathway, and they seem to be on a pathway that could very likely end up in a civil war. And the divide now is more stark than ever. One side is celebrating, the other side is unhappy, and you've got the one side, believing there's no justice, and now because of their rights, there's justice. So they're going to do more of these kind of rights. And the other side is feeling that justice has not been done. So that's a very dangerous situation for United States. And the church really needs to get up and get involved. The church needs to start bringing a light to people. Invariably, in a situation like that, both sides are wrong. Both sides have got their positions, they've got their opinions, but both of them are wrong. And anytime you start reacting with hatred and anger, and, as we had the article yesterday that the one guy who was shot, after a carjacking, holding a woman up at gunpoint and that, and then people want to start demonstrating until they find out that the guy that was shot was white. Then they leave. Then it's fine. So in other words, justice is now dependent on the color of the skin of the perpetrator. Now, I just want to say, coming from South Africa, that was the history I grew up in. Obviously, growing up under apartheid, black people would suffer, under that thing. And so whether it's a black person that suffers and gets accused or gets found guilty because of the color of their skin, or whether a white person gets found guilty because of the color of their skin, it goes against what Martin Luther King Jr. stood for. He said he longs for a day when people are not judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. Now, the other thing, we've got to start realizing that this is a fallen world, and you're not going to have perfect justice. Doesn't matter which side of the divide you're on, you're not going to have perfect justice. But if you have faith in the Lord, one day everything will be sorted out. And when you have faith in the Lord, you've got to look at what the Lord's commanded you. Genesis 1 verse 28, God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful and increase in number. Fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the sky and over every living creature that moves along the ground. So God has called you to be faithful. That is the mandate that God has on your life, is that you be fruitful. So by being faithful, you become fruitful. And if you're fruitful long enough, you'll begin to multiply. And when you multiply for long enough, you will fill the earth. And once you fill the earth, then what will happen is you will begin to rule. We spoke about Jesus healing blind Bartimaeus on Monday. And, we drew out of that the fact that if you want to come to faith in God, you first got to recognize your condition. Bartimaeus had to know that he was blind. Someone had to tell him that he was blind. Before he was going to come to Jesus for help, he had to recognize that he was blind. And in the same way, sinners have been blinded by Satan. 2 Corinthians 4 verse 3 and 4. But even if our gospel is veiled, it is veiled to those who are perishing, whose minds the God of this age is blinded. And the NLT puts it this way. Satan, who is the God of this world, has blinded the minds of those who don't believe. So their minds are blinded. Their spiritual lives are blinded. In the spiritual realm, they are blind, which means they have no foresight. And due to the fact that there's no spiritual foresight, no spiritual insight, due to the fact that their spiritual eyes are blind, they are ignorant. But the problem with ignorance is that you're doing things that you're not doing on purpose, but you still carry the consequences of them. And people don't care if you didn't know. Let's be honest. I mean, everyone says don't judge, but the world is full of judgmental people. The world is full of opinionated people, and they don't let you off. So you need the spiritual insight. You need to have that spiritual insight, that spiritual foresight, that you can realize and be led by God in how you go. And the other thing we see now, and I want to look at today, is the fact that sinners are blinded by their condition. Listen to what the Apostle Paul says in Ephesians 4 verse 17 to 20. This I say therefore, and testify to it in the Lord, that you should no longer walk as the rest of the Gentiles walk, in the futility, and I've put it there in brackets, uselessness. The word futility there means uselessness of their mind. Having their understanding darkened, being alienated from the life of God because of the ignorance that is in them because of the blindness of their heart, who being past feeling have given themselves over to lewdness, to work all uncleanness with greediness. Now, I want you to realize, if you watch a situation room every day and you look at the news that is going on, this is describing the world that we live in to a T. And so what the Apostle Paul is saying, don't walk as the rest of the Gentiles. In other words, what he's saying there, as the rest of the non-believers walk. Don't walk as the world walks. The world walks in the futility or the uselessness of their mind. The minds of the world are useless. Why? Because their understanding is darkened. Their understanding is darkened. They do not have a spiritual understanding. That which they think is good is going to break things down to them. That which they think is great is going to destroy them. They fight for things that bring about their destruction. Think about how foolish that is. You're fighting for things that bring about your destruction. Why is that? Because they are alienated from God. And so because of the fact that they're alienated from God, there's ignorance in them. And there's ignorance in them because their heart is blind. So in the spiritual realm, they cannot see. If you cannot see in the spiritual realm, you are making decisions that are not good for you. And so because of the blindness of their heart, what are they? They're past feeling. They have no conscience. They've given themselves over to lewdness. They do evil things. They do dirty things. They do impure things to work all uncleanness with greediness. Greediness means they never have enough. So I don't know what your blindness is, but you have a blindness. And the futility or uselessness of your mind is caused by the blindness of your heart. And so what happens is you go on living your life thinking you're okay when you're not. And there's nothing more dangerous than thinking you're okay when you're not. And we think we're okay when we're not because we're comparing ourselves with ourselves. We're comparing ourselves with our own opinions. And when we compare ourselves with other people, we're looking for the lowest common denominator. So I'm not as bad as Hitler. Great, so what? Doesn't mean you're not bad. Just because you haven't killed 6 million Jews in the Second World War doesn't mean you're not bad. All right, so what does it mean if you're not as bad as Hitler? What does it mean if you say you've never murdered someone? What does that mean? Okay, you're good in terms of what? How many times do people come along and they say, I'm a good person, but you speak to people that know them and they disagree. I don't think they're a good person. How many people that know you would not agree that you're a good person? They would say that you're a bad person. You see, it's all based on opinion. And at the end of the day, we've got all of these opinions. None of them are accurate because we're blind in the heart because we don't know the Lord and because we don't base our decisions on the Word. And so sinners are blinded by their condition. They cannot see what's really going on. And when you're blind, you cannot be fruitful. And when you're blind, you don't know that in terms of your eternity, you're in great danger. God's calling us back to be fruitful and to multiply and to fill the earth and rule over the earth for the purposes of the kingdom of heaven. Let's say our declaration together. And I'm going to ask you to say this with passion and to mean it. Say, I will be fruitful and multiply because the blessing of God is on me. Let's just pray together. Prayer will be up on the screen. Say, Dear God, I thank you for choosing me to do your work and for giving me the blessing of having fruit, as I know that this will take me on to multiply. Thank you for opening my mind so that I can comprehend your word, and for putting your hand over me so that I can complete your purpose on the earth. I love you, Jesus. Amen. Amen. Thanks. And I just want to mention we've had Stru's Bob this week, Grateful Car, I mentioned the Sibs. And tomorrow, coming up, tomorrow morning, 11 a.m., another exciting edition of Help I'm a Pastor. Anyway, I'll see you again tomorrow, same time, same place for the Situation Room. God bless till then.